Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursday night's training. So tonight our topic is stories. We're going to learn about storytelling because it's a critical or a very important part, almost essential part of your marketing efforts. The fact is, stories engage your audience. They build trust. We were born with the desire to listen to stories. The fact is, it's in our DNA. Back in our history, in prehistoric times, the way they relayed information was through stories, and we continue to carry this with us. Studies have shown that when you present facts, people lose that information pretty quickly. But when you present your facts in stories, people will retain that information 22 times more. The other thing about telling stories is it connects you with your audience. When people hear a story, when you're connecting that way, it helps to build trust. And as we all know, the know, like, and trust factor is critical in getting new clients, because they're first going to want to learn about you. They need to be able to trust you in order to purchase your products or services. So tonight we're going to talk about the 7 storytelling tips, because the fact is there are many different ways I can provide information on storytelling, and we will hear some of these other ways because there is so much in stories and it's a fascinating area. But tonight we're just going to learn 7 tips for creating stories that will engage your audience. The first tip is to choose a clear message. Before you write your story or before you start to tell your story, you want to make sure that you know what message you're trying to relay. It's very important so that you keep that story focused, so that you keep your characters, your plot, and everything online for that story. You know what story you want to tell because you understand the message that you want to relay. We have millions of stories. We may not realize it, but we have so many stories in our lives. And as you start telling stories, as you start relaying your life in story form, you will begin to see that you have more stories than you think. They do not have to be, climbing Mount Everest or something like that. They really are the basic nuts and bolts about your life, about growing your business or whatever you're in. If you're in relationships, it's how you've evolved in relationships or things you've learned in relationships. You have a ton of stories. And once you start telling them, you're going to open up the floodgates. So the most important thing is be very clear about what the central message is. Whatever message you want in that story, you tell it. And choose one message per story. It's sort of like ads. Everything we do, we want to stay focused because a confused mind says no. So when we tell the story, we have one clear focus, and that is what we build our story around. Now, when you're telling a story, tip number 2 or strategy number 2 is to embrace conflict. Don't feel like your stories have to be soft and nice and pretty. Be willing to embrace conflict, because the fact is, conflict creates drama. Drama is what engages people. Think about it. How many people like to watch the news, or you drive on the freeway and there's a crash, and you say to yourself, I am not going to look at the crash. I am not going to be one of those rubberneckers. And what happens? You pass the crash and you turn your head and you look at it. We cannot resist drama. And conflict will add that to your story. It adds tension. This tension is what grabs hold of people, what keeps them listening. So be willing to embrace conflict in your story stories, and that will be a very important part of it. And this can be internal conflicts, it can be conflicts with another person, or it can be conflicts with an organization. You know, the struggles that we go through within, that's a large part of my stories, because we have to face a lot of fears when we're building our business, and that's part of what I help my clients do, to walk through those periods when they hit them. And we need to be willing to embrace those conflicts, to talk about the fears, to talk about the challenges when we tell our stories. You also want to have a clear structure. I don't know if you notice, every once in a while I'm looking down because I have notes here to help guide my structure. Okay, so you want to have a clear structure. Now, basically in a story, we have the beginning, the middle, and the end. That's your basic structure of a story. You also have the characters, the plot, and the conclusion. So you have this structure. Now, the beginning of your story is going to be the inciting incident. What triggered this event? What triggered the events that are going to occur in your story? And this is the hook. Okay, this is where you grab their attention. You know, in a sense, an ad is a story, and our headline is this inciting incident. It is the hook. And this is what grabs people's attention, so they want to hear the story. Now, the middle of the story is where you have your central conflict. This is where you've embraced conflict. It's where you talk about the pain or the challenge. You address that issue. You describe it in your story. You share the experience. But in the middle is where you have the conflict. And then you have the end. And this is the conclusion. This is the message that you chose when you decided to tell this story. So that is how you plan the story. So it has the beginning, the hook, the inciting incident, the middle, which is the conflict, the turmoil, whatever it is, the struggle that the person you're telling the story about, or yourself, if you're telling the story about yourself, that's where you have the central conflict. And then at the end is the conclusion, the resolution of that conflict, which is the message. The message is basically, I can get you from the pain to the resolution, whatever your niche is. Now, you want to, number four is you want to mine your personal experiences. Now, most people feel like, oh, I don't really have any stories. You know, my life is pretty humdrum. I don't do anything exciting. That's not true. Once you start looking at the stories, once you start writing some of the stories in your life, you might catch an idea and write it down as a story. Write these little bits and pieces, stories that come to your mind. Be willing to keep a notebook or something to collect these, because you're going to find that you have stories. You know, I don't have an exciting life. You know, I do the same thing almost every day. You see my pictures. I go hiking. It's not like it's these grand adventures, which doesn't mean that I don't have some adventures just like you do. But we all are living normal lives, whatever that is for us. But we have stories, we have struggles, we have times where we're concerned or perplexed. You know, I had a 2-week episode recently where I was struggling a little bit more to focus on the positive aspects of my life. Now, this can become a story about what I did, how I went to Louise Hayes to get some positive affirmations, what I did as I struggled through this period of not being as optimistic as I wanted to be, as not going with the flow. So these are the kinds of just little stories that we have, that we tell our audience and we share with them, because we're able to show them that A, everybody has this kind of conflict. B, this is what the conflict feels like. And then C, this is how to get to the other side of this conflict. And you have those stories in your life. So start mining those stories. No matter how insignificant you think your story is, put it down on paper. Start collecting a little notebook with your stories. The fifth one is to engage your audience. Now, this is not only the content of your story, but primarily the use of your body language, your eye contact, facial expressions, your tone and tempo, pausing. This is what helps to engage your audience. If you're doing videos, it's very important to have eye contact. And the best way to do that, the way to do that, is you look at the camera, okay? So oftentimes we want to look at the screen, but if you see here, you can tell I'm looking at the screen. My eyes are down, but when I'm looking at the camera, you see me looking at you. I have direct eye contact with you. So when you're telling your story, you want to do that. You want to change your tone and tempo. We've all had the teacher that would talk about the topic in a monotonic framework, and we would listen, and we would be so bored because the tone and tempo was the same regardless of what they were saying. Don't do that. Use tone and tempo. Raise your voice, lower your voice. Talk like you're talking. I mean, you're talking to your audience. And that's one of the tricks I use for video. I see you. I am talking to you. I am not giving a presentation. I am talking to you because I have the image of you listening to me. And so when you're talking, this is what you want to do. Now, movement of your body, that's going to vary from person to person. As you have probably noticed from my talks, I use my hands a lot when I talk. Bothers some people to no end, but it is who I am, and this is what I do. So this is one of the ways that my body portrays part of what I'm talking about. We also use, again, inflection, tone, and tempo, especially on a podcast. On a podcast, you don't have the advantage of eye contact. You don't have the advantage of body language. You really have to use your voice. So you use tone and tempo. I can talk like I'm really angry. That's a tone thing. That's a tempo thing. If I am very upset, then we have that tone, that pausing. Another way is to actually pause. Take a moment. Take a break between your words. Now, this is one that I have to practice because I tend to talk fast. I tend to talk consistently. But this is the way I am, and it's okay. We all practice our stories. So don't feel like you have to do it perfectly in the beginning. It's okay. We've all got to learn, but start practicing stories. And then the sixth tip is to start observing good storytellers. So you can do this by watching movies. You know, you can see how a movie unfolds, how they're telling the story, the plot, the beginning, middle, and end, the characters, the plot, the inflection. Listen to the actors and actresses, how they use inflection and body language to help relay their messages. Go ahead and listen to YouTube or watch YouTube. Listen to the speakers. TED Talks are a great way. Get some audio books because those are wonderful. You can start hearing the ones that do not engage you because they don't have change in tone or in tempo or whatever it is, the inflection. And you can listen and you can say, okay, what about that did I not like? So that you don't do that. And then listen to the really excellent storytellers who engage you, and the very artful ones who can change their voices, and they could be doing 6 different characters and you can tell by the voice that they're using that it's a different character. So you listen to good storytellers. Garrison Keillor, I don't know how many of you remember Garrison Keillor, but he was a master storyteller, and he was able to tell stories. Fascinating. He would start here. He was one who could meander with intention. So even though I said focus, he was somebody who focused, but he had these meanderings that always led back in a circle to the beginning, to that beginning message. So listen to these skilled storytellers because they will help you. The other thing is to narrow the scope of your story. And I think I talked a little bit about that in the beginning, but you want to make sure that you've got a topic that you're talking about. Listen to this one. This was a topic of storytelling and 7 strategies or 7 tips for telling your stories. And listen to how much content it had. There are many other dimensions of storytelling I could have shared, but I needed to pick one that I was going to share with you tonight. And in another session of storytelling training, I will share another aspect, but you need to keep it very focused, so that you can get into the detail of the story to help people feel it and connect with it and have it be tangible. For instance, my mother-in-law, okay, she would lose the focus of her story. I don't know if you've got somebody in your life like this, but she would start telling a story and then she would keep branching off into these topics that were not really related other than they were related to the person. So you want to avoid that because in her case, it made her stories boring, where if she would have stayed on topic, it would have kept our interest better. But if you meander too far, then you lose your audience. I could have meandered too far with the story about my mother-in-law, but you get the point. You've had storytellers or you've listened to people tell stories where they just branch off in too many directions and you lose the point. You lose the message that they intended to give you. So again, as I've talked about earlier, when you think of a story, write it down or tape it on your phone, whatever it is, whatever you can do to start capturing your stories, because then you're going to have a notebook of stories. It's going to start stimulating your knowledge or you're knowing that you've got stories and you're going to be able to go there and pick one. You can choose a topic and then find one of your stories and start experimenting with it. You can write it if you want to start that way. We can tell little short stories and posts, and this is another aspect of storytelling. You still use the same guidelines, but now you're writing, and so the words are what you're going to express the conflict for. I don't know which word that is, which one I should have used, but anyhow, but you get the point. Start someplace and then start actually telling your stories. And as I said, the best way to start telling stories is to start telling stories. The way we get better at it is to practice. Okay, I remember the first time I got on a live and I, started doing a live, I shook. I was so nervous. My voice quivered. It was so hard for me to do. But now I'm very comfortable being on Facebook Lives. And this is the same way, or any video. I'm very comfortable on video with video training. This is the same thing with stories. Once you start telling your stories, you're going to become more and more comfortable, and you're going to these stories are going to start blossoming even further. So there's our lesson on storytelling. And we're about ready to move into June, so it's going to be time for me to pick my month of topics. And I'm real interested in knowing what topics you would like me to do Thursday night trainings. What is important for you? What is it that you want to address? What is it that you're concerned about? What challenges are you dealing with now? What questions do you have? Please put those in the comments so that I can build my Facebook Lives around the things that most concern you. Okay? I thank you all for joining me tonight.